westerns or Little House on the Prairie where they had to battle the prairie fires?
Yep.
Okay. So when you look at grasses and trees, if you look at a grass, this is my great art, right? If you look at a grass with its root system, the growth point, the node for grass plants is just underneath the surface of the soil. So if a fire comes and sweeps through and it burns off the tops of the grass, does the grass come back? Yeah. Because grasses can actually survive in a fire environment. That growth point is below the soil, the fire sweeps through quickly, and then it grows from underneath the soil. It's fine. Same reason why you can mow your grass. Can you control weeds through mowing?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's how I keep the crabapple trees out of my front yard. You mow the little baby crabapple trees and they die, right? So for trees and other things that are not grasses, this is a horrible art.
See, that's a tree.
The trees, their growth points, their nodes are on the tips of the branches. That's why you have to prune them back sometimes. So when the trees grow bigger, they grow from their edges. So if a fire comes through and burns the top of the tree, what did you just burn off?
The living stuff.
The leaves and the nodes, the growth points. And so trees have a harder time recovering from a fire. And so fire is more of a limiting factor for trees than it is for grasses. Okay? And that's why in this area we don't really have enough moisture to suppress those fires. And anytime there's a fire, it's going to kill off. You can actually control your pastures. How many of you have tried to keep the weeds out of your pastures by burning them? Every day? That's a little aggressive. Can they control the weeds in the ditches by burning them? Yeah. So the weeds are in the same category of plants as the trees. They grow from their tips instead of from their underneath the soil. And so you can actually control weed and tree populations by using fire as a control agent, as a limiting factor. Because then the grasses will grow back nice and it'll limit the weeds. Soil chemistry, we talked about hydrangeas. If they don't have enough space, and then other living things can also be limiting factors. Things like predators can be limiting factors. Different organisms will tolerate those limiting factors in different ways. For example, polar bears can tolerate cold temperatures really, really well, right? Boa constrictors, not so much. They do not tolerate cold temperatures. But the boa constrictors that live in the jungle, can they tolerate warm conditions?
Yeah, because they're cold-blooded.
Yeah, they're endothermic. They're endothermic. This is a fancy word for cold-blooded. Yeah, they get their heat from their surroundings. So they actually really like those warm conditions. They do well there. And so different organisms, whether they're plants or animals, are going to tolerate different conditions in different ways. The range of tolerance is what is the maximum and the minimum conditions where that particular organism likes to grow. So if you looked at a polar bear, again, do they just have one cold temperature that they like? No. There's probably like an optimal cold temperature, right, where it's not too cold, but it's not so hot that they overheat, right? So they like it kind of, the idea of range of tolerance is, the story that really illustrates it well is Goldilocks and the Three Bears. So when Goldilocks went to the Three Bears' house, part of it was the oatmeal was too hot, or the oatmeal was too cold, and then it was just right. Or the bed was too hard, or the bed was too soft, or it was just right. And so Goldilocks and the Three Bears is a really good example of range of tolerance. For humans, what's a good temperature range where you can go outside in shorts and a t-shirt and just be comfortable?
100 degrees.
Like 70.
60, 70, 30, I think is a little cold.
Yeah.
68 to 72.
68. It is different for everybody because you all have different tolerances. Some of you get cold really easily, right? And some of you could, I think we talked about this yesterday, some of you could wear shorts in February and still be fine. But if you had to go outside man versus wild style, and all you had was a t-shirt and shorts, what temperature would you really like it to be outside?
60.
Upper 60s to maybe lower 80s. There's a range
Not
there, right?
50.
I think at 50, you know, more
Negative
people
80.
actually die from hypothermia in the 40s, when the
What?
temperature's in the 40s versus when it's in the 30s or lower. Because they go outside when the temperature's in the 40s and they're like, I'm tough, I'm fine. And then they die from hypothermia. Because we actually don't have any fur to help keep ourselves warm. And if it's cold out, they're smart enough to put a coat on. And so more people die from hypothermia when the temperature's in the 40s versus when the temperature's actually cold outside. Because people will tend to dress appropriately.
I like how it's like really, really cold in January, and then 1 or 2 days in February it'll be like 45 degrees.
When it warms up a little bit in the wintertime.
And everybody else thinks it's like, oh, it's so hot outside like summer.
Kind of a nice break, yeah. So we have this range of tolerance. There's temperatures that we can tolerate. Like you could go outside when it was in the 50s outside in shorts and a t-shirt, and you'd be fine for a while. But if you had to stay out in the woods when it was 50 degrees out without shelter in shorts and a t-shirt, your body would get stressed. You would shiver and you would need to eat more food for energy, right? But then there's that like golden zone, that optimal zone, where if it's like upper 60s to lower 80s, you're just comfortable, right? You're not shivering, you're not sweating, it's just a comfortable day, right? That's the optimal zone. Then it gets up into the mid to upper 80s, into the 90s. You can still be outside in shorts and a t-shirt, right? But you'll probably be sweating, especially in direct sun, if you don't have shelter. And so then you have to do things like take extra water along or find some shade. But what about if it gets really hot? Like 110,
Take it all
120.
off.
Stay inside.
Then all the people,
Oh.
then they start telling people on the Weather Channel and stuff, make sure you stay inside, stay well hydrated. You start having reports of like heat stroke and heat exhaustion, right, when it gets too hot. And so you can survive when it's 50 or below, and you can survive when it's 110 degrees outside, but it tends to kind of stress you out. So no matter what the organism is, and no matter what variable you're looking at, you can make a graph that looks kind of like this for the range of tolerance. In this center zone here, this is the optimum zone. This is where they're like, it's a beautiful day. This might be just the right amount of oxygen, or just the right temperature, or just the right soil pH, or just the right altitude. If you go up too far in altitude, does it cause you stress with the amount that you have to breathe to keep up? Okay. So this is the best altitude, or the best temperature. This is where you're just loving it. This is the perfect living conditions for your species. As you start to go less than that, or more than that, this would be maybe like the mid-60s, or getting up into the lower to mid-80s, where you're still probably fine, but you'd rather be here.
75.
Yeah, you'd rather be at 73 or 75, but you'll be fine at like 66 or 67 or 84 or 85. You're starting to get kind of hot, or you're starting to get a little bit chilly, but you're probably going to be fine. Then you get out to here, where it says the zone of physiological stress. This is when you have to shiver to keep warm, but you're not going to die right away. Or where you have to sweat to cool down, but you're not going to die right away. And then you get outside of that, here and here, you get to the zone of intolerance. And so if we made you go outside, like, what's his name, Bear Grylls?
Bear Grylls.
Grills. If we made you go outside in just a shorts and a t-shirt, and it was below freezing outside, could you survive?
For a little bit.
For a little bit, but the colder it got, the shorter time it would be until you would die, right? And really, humans don't have the fur that we need to be able to survive outside in conditions really much below 45 degrees, 45, 50 degrees. If you're just outside in shorts and a t-shirt, you're going to have problems eventually. We really, our system cannot tolerate that without some sort of shelter or extra clothing. And then if you get too hot, over there on the right-hand side, there's a point at which you really just shouldn't be outside. And if you have to be outside without shelter or extra water, it's probably going to result in you dying, right? And again, the hotter it gets, the quicker that death is going to come. And so on the extreme ends there, you have that zone of intolerance. What shape do we call that graph?
Parabola.
No, it's actually not about a parabola. What, did somebody else say a different word? A bell curve. Have you heard of the word bell curve?
Yeah.
Why do we call that kind of a graph a bell curve?
Looks like a bell.
It looks like a bell.
It's pretty straightforward. It looks like a bell. And so at the top of the bell, this is where you're going to find the most organisms because it's the best conditions. And then as you get out to the sides of the bell, the conditions are just deteriorating. They're getting worse and worse, and you'd be less and less able to survive. Okay? So optimum, when it says physiological stress, physiological means the way that your body works. Anatomy and physiology is the study of the human body. And so it's body stress. You're sweating or you're shivering. You can deal with it for a while, but it's stressing your body out physically and you won't be able to hang on for very long. And then the zone of intolerance means that you just can't, your body can't handle that. So you could put whatever organism you wanted in here. This is steelhead trout with temperature. You could do oak trees and carbon dioxide concentration. You could do worms and soil moisture. Do the worms like it when the soil is a little bit moist?
Yeah.
Do they like it when the soil is soaking wet?
Um,
No, they all climb out. They go out on the sidewalks, right? Do the worms like it when the soil is super dry?
No.
No. So they like it, it's the same shaped graph. Hi, come on in. So you can make a graph that looks like that for any variable and any organism. Okay, that's the end of what we're talking about with zones of tolerance and range of tolerance. We're going to switch gears a little bit and talk about yesterday's lab out to the park.
Yes.
So what you were looking for in the park yesterday was called ecological succession. And succession is just change in an ecosystem over time. And the kind of change that you're going to see is very predictable. Anytime an ecosystem gets disturbed, you're going to see those grasses first, and then the short shrubs or weeds. Then you're going to see the big shrubs or the baby trees, and then you're going to see half-grown trees and then full-grown trees. So succession is what happens when one community replaces the other. Because as you go from grasses to trees, are those going to be the same animals that can live there?
No.
You have different animals. They're going to live in a full-grown oak tree versus what can live in a grassland. And so if you had a fire in a forest, and that you had a meadow in that area as it was recovering, grassland, there would be certain animals that could live in that meadow. And as the trees start to get bigger, they outcompete the grass for nutrients and sunlight, and the animals that lived in the grass have to go find a new place to live, and other animals, like squirrels, will move in because they can live in those trees. And you'll go from tree-dwelling birds, or from grass, ground-dwelling birds like pheasants maybe, to more of a tree-dwelling bird like a woodpecker. And so as the plants change, the animals change too. And you can really predict how that's going to happen. There are two different kinds of succession. There's primary and secondary. They're basically the same, but primary succession kind of starts out more from scratch. Let you finish right. Good? Okay. Primary succession is just like secondary succession at the end, but it starts out different. Primary succession starts out on bare rock. So in what kind of an instance would you be starting out with bare rock? Maybe if you have a lot of erosion due to a river, or a flood actually is going to be secondary succession, because even though it's going to scour all the plants off, you still usually have soil.
Volcano.
Okay, if a volcano erupts and the lava pours down the side of the mountain, and then that lava cools, it's brand new bare rock. Okay, so after a volcano eruption is a good example. When else would you lose your topsoil?
A bomb.
A very maybe bad bomb, yes, or an asteroid impact. Kill the dinosaurs in the area of impact. What about like a landslide? You know, where all the topsoil goes and you have bare, or a cliff face breaks off, so you have a rock slide and you're exposing brand new bare rock. That would be another example of primary succession. One thing that, so if you have to make the soil from scratch, then you're talking about primary succession. So how long do you think it takes to make soil? A long time. And so primary succession usually takes longer because of this first part right here. Okay? After that, once you have your soil, it's just like the succession that we saw yesterday in the park. You have grasses, woody, weeds, shrubs, trees, and you go on. But making that soil in the first place takes a long time. One thing that I want you to add to your notes, it's not written up here, is the idea of a pioneer species. Who are the pioneers? Settlers are the first ones to move in, right? First Europeans to move in. So a pioneer species are the first species that can move into an area that's bare rock. Your two major pioneer species, you ready? First ones that move in on bare rock. Lichens, L-I-C-H-E-N. We've looked at those outside all the time. And mosses. Lichens and mosses can grow on bare rock. And then there's weathering and erosion of the bare rock. There's this gritty layer of sand, and then the moss and the lichens die. Maybe some spiders and some little tiny bugs move in on the mosses and lichens, and then they die, and that dead stuff gets mixed in with the dirt, and it actually forms a thin layer of soil. And then you can get some bigger things moving in. But those pioneer species are the ones that can grow on bare rock. Secondary succession is just like what we saw yesterday at the lake. That was the front of your yellow sheet. So secondary succession is when there's some sort of disturbance. It can be man-made, like construction or mowing, or it can be natural, like a flood or a fire or a drought. But what it's going to do is going to reset it back to that grassland stage. The time frame on your sheet yesterday ended at more like 200 to 250 years. This one ends at about 50 to 75 years. It really depends on your conditions. If it's warm enough and if there's plenty of moisture, that's going to go a little bit faster. Depends on what kind of trees you're talking about. Sequoias grow a little bit slower. Secondary succession is just when you have some sort of temporary disturbance. You still have topsoil, and the plants just have to grow back. Usually just the plants and animals can just come in from a neighboring community. The seeds blow in on the wind. The animals move in from an adjacent area. You don't have to start over making soil from scratch. So that one can go a lot faster. As soon as your community is stable, it's not really changing anymore, then it's what we call a climax community. Add that to your notes as well. A climax community is whatever is normal for that biome. So around here, your climax community would be a grassland. Yeah, there's not many actual native grasslands left. Out on the East Coast, in the eastern third of the U.S., your climax community would be more of a deciduous forest, like oak trees and maple trees. In the desert, your climax community is going to be those big saguaro cactus, the roadrunner cactuses with the big arms. Those actually grow really slow. Those full-grown, big roadrunner-style cactuses can be 250 to 300 years old. Okay? So a climax community is when you have whatever is normal for that ecosystem and it's just nice and stable. It's not being replaced by anything else. All right. What questions do you have at this point? No, you can't have any cookies. Those are for a lab for tomorrow. All right. Go ahead and push pause.